There are at least 3 ways to build most EDH decks. Strong. Fun. And mean. Let's take a look at the strong, fun, and mean ways that I would build Jorn, God of Winter. And the video starts right now.
Special thanks to our Patreon supporters who power our channel. Check out our Patreon for monthly giveaways, exclusive content, and even a starring role in our fan fight series. Link in the description below.
Hello and welcome to the day. Thank you for spending your time with us. Welcome back to another episode of Jake and Joel Are Magic. I am Joel. We're going to talk about the strong, fun, and mean ways that I would build Jorn, God of Winter. But before we do, if you would, go down there, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out. Let's get into this commander. Jorn, God of Winter, is our legendary snow creature god. We have got a snow commander here, and that's exactly how we're going to build him. Jorn, God of Winter, says whenever Jorn attacks, untap each snow permanent you control. So it can untap land. That's relevant. It'll come up more later. Let's look at the back of Jorn. We've got Kaldring, the Rimestaff, on our legendary snow artifact side. A black, a blue, and one other for an ability that says tap. You may play target snow permanent from your graveyard this turn permanent. Again, we can play lands from our graveyard. If you do, it enters the battlefield tap. So we have got a great snow commander here. For our strong, fun, and mean ways to build, the strong way, I want to go with untapped mana. I just want to be able to fill up our mana pool with as much possible mana as we can possibly make, because we are untapping with Jorn and we're playing lands possibly from our graveyard with Kaldring. For the fun way, I want to go with a self-mill zombies strategy. It'll become more clear what I'm talking about in a second. And for our mean way, we're going to go with Winter's Chill. And I bet you can guess what I'm talking about with that before we even discuss it. Let's get into the strong way. For the strong way, I want to be able to make as much mana as we possibly can at any given time, have a mana pool that might not even empty when it comes time to empty the mana pool, and then figure out a way to pay that off. So let's start by building in the untapped clause. We've already got Jorn, so every time he attacks, we can untap our snow lands. Seedborn Muse is going to let us do the same thing. Untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step, so we can potentially, at the end of our opponent's turns, add all of our mana to our mana pool and then untap as we go into our next opponent's turn. Wilderness Reclamation at the beginning of your end step, untap all lands your control. So during our turn, we can use all of our mana to its maximum potential because we're going to get to untap and be untapped for our opponent's phases. Now, what are we going to do with all this mana? Well, hopefully collect more and more of it using cards like Krufix, God of Horizons. That bottom ability, if unused mana would empty from your mana pool, that mana becomes colorless instead. That's what we want to be doing. We want to be adding mana to our mana pool, it converting into colorless mana, and then just staying. We don't want it going away because we want to build up a ton of mana. Cards like Horizon Stone are also going to allow us to do that. If you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes colorless instead, so it stays in our mana pool, and we can build up this incredible vault of colorless mana that we can use on the back end to hopefully win. Doubling Cube is going to let us double the amount of each type of mana in our mana pool, so for just 3 mana and tap on the Doubling Cube, we're going to double what we are able to collect in our mana pool to spend. Also, we've got cards like Upwelling. Mana pools don't empty at the end of phases or turns. This also applies for our opponents. However, we are able to use it to our advantage because we knew that we were building for this. So the question then becomes, what do we do with all of this mana? Well, I've got 2 options for you. The first is just Torment of Hailfire. We're in Sultai colors. We can put X into Torment of Hailfire and just win. Repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless they sack a permanent or discard a card. They're going to run out of permanents and discarding cards eventually, especially if we can build up an enormous vault of mana in our mana pool. And past that, they're going to start losing life and then hopefully lose the game. And if you don't want to attack the opponents directly, we can just do it internally and go with Helix Pinnacle. X to put X tower counters on Helix Pinnacle. And at the beginning of our upkeep, if there are 100 or more tower counters on Helix Pinnacle, we win straight up. It's a 1 mana shrouded enchantment, so it kind of has built-in protection for itself. And that would be a win condition in a build like this. I really like that as the base of this. You can also get other X spells to fill out some of our win conditions. Don't want to put too many in there. Want to get the ones that you really want to focus on and are hopefully going to win you the game, because as we fill up our mana pool, we want to use that mana eventually, and a card like Helix Pinnacle is going to let us win. That's the strong base that I would build for Jorn. Let's look at the fun payoff way and go with a self-mill zombies strategy. So with Kaldring the Rimestaff, we're able to play snow permanents from our graveyard with just a tap, and that's hugely beneficial, especially if we can run some sort of combo potential with Altar of Dementia, sacking things to have a player put cards from the top of their library into their graveyard. There's a lot of graveyard synergy there, and it's strong with Altar of Dementia and Kaldring the Rimestaff to just sort of have a snow creature looping and always milling somebody out. I think that could be very powerful. We can also play with cards like Deadbridge Chant in these colors. It enters, put the top 10 cards of your library into your graveyard. Any of those that are snow permanents, which hopefully if we're building this correctly, most of them will be. Kaldring's able to tap and then let us cast those, so we've got a second hand essentially with our graveyard. And Deadbridge Chant is also going to give us the ability to, at the beginning of our upkeep, choose a card at random from our graveyard, and if it's a creature, it goes right onto the battlefield. So this is sort of what we want to be doing. We want to be milling ourselves and using our graveyard as a secondary hand so that we've got, through Rimestaff, more cards that we could be playing. Narfi the Betrayer King is a really good card to sort of focus this whole build around. It's a snow permanent. It's giving snow and zombie creatures +1/+1, and for 3 snow mana, you can return it from the graveyard to the battlefield without even needing Kaldring to be involved. Kaldring could return a different snow creature, or we don't even need it on the battlefield, really, just for Narfi to return. So if we're milling ourselves, Narfi will eventually hit the graveyard, hopefully, and then we're able to return it and give our tribal zombies deck a nice little anthem across the board that also can just keep coming back over and over again. With zombies, let's run some good zombie soldiers if we're going to lean into the tribe, and that's Diregraph Captain for sure. Other zombies we control are getting +1/+1, and if our other zombies we control are dying, opponents are losing life on a target. So we've got Altar of Dementia cards already, so we're sacrificing zombies. They can come back through Kaldring, and we're able to get this kind of aristocrat style drain going with this strategy. Dead of Winter is a fantastic card to run in this. All non-snow creatures get -X/-X until end of turn. It gets around indestructible, and our stuff dodges it. It can be really strong in this deck, as can Blood on the Snow. Either destroy all creatures or planeswalkers, and we're able to return a creature or planeswalker with converted mana cost X or less from the graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the amount of snow mana that we spent on Blood on the Snow. So up to 6 CMC planeswalker or creature back from the graveyard. And that's sort of how we're strategizing this. We want to play some snow zombies. We want to play some snow permanents. We want to be sort of dealing with our graveyard as though it were a secondary hand, and just really dealing with the recursion there. A really strong creature to run in this deck is Muldrotha, because we're going to, like Rimestaff, be able to play permanents from our graveyard and use that even further as a secondary hand. And we can run the Saga of the 3 Seasons. We're self-milling. This sort of does everything we want. We're self-milling. We're returning 2 snow permanents from the graveyard to the hand, and we can choose 3 cards in each graveyard to make the opponents shuffle those back in, so we can kind of deal with other graveyard strategies that might be happening. That's the fun way that I would build this deck, with a snow zombie sub-theme. Let's look at the main way and go with Winter's Chill. You see the card on the screen, you know where we're going with this. This is going to be one of the meanest possible strategies that you can build. Jorn is going to let us untap on attacks, so we're going to be able to get around a lot of our tap down stuff. But let me warn you, this is one of the meanest strategies that you can build into Commander, and a lot of players aren't going to want to play with this. So make sure that you've got opponents that know what you're playing in advance, and also be prepared to pretty much play arch enemy in this game, because people are going to be coming for you if you're playing a bunch of permission and tap based stuff. Let's look through it. Winter's Orb, of course, pay 2 for an artifact as long as it's untapped. Players can't untap more than 1 land during their untap steps. Very mean, especially when Jorn is going to allow us to untap our lands anyway. Static Orb is just more stacks of this. As long as it's untapped, players can't untap more than 2 permanents during their untap step. So a lot of stuff is getting tapped down and staying tapped down. But we have a way around that, which is why we're building this version of it in the first place. Stasis is having players skip their untap steps, period. Just nothing untaps. Obviously, we have to pay 1 blue to keep this up, but that's a small price to pay to keep the lock on the game that Jorn is going to allow us to get around. Back to basics, we're just kind of adding the synergies. We're adding redundancy into what we want to be doing with this, and that's keeping stuff tapped down. Non-basic lands don't untap during their controller's untap steps. Again, we can get around it, our opponents can't. Root Maze, artifacts and lands come into play tapped, so they never even get to use them. That's pretty mean, especially if we've already got one of our orbs on the battlefield, back to basics on the battlefield. Their lands are coming into play tap. They never get to use them until they're able to remove those 2 things that are sort of providing a lock. This is a smaller scale card, not as impactful as I would normally like, but it's got a lot of synergy with the deck because it is a snow deck. Enters the battlefield, you tap the enchanted creature, and as long as you control another snow permanent, which will have a lot of snow lands in this deck, enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So this is an example of some single target removal, which is always good in your EDH deck, and you probably need to be running more of it. It's a good example of what that would look like with the synergies of this deck, and kind of what I preach with these how to build videos. Villainous Wealth, I think, is a fantastic finisher to this because we're going to get our mana, we're going to be using all of our mana, and we've got a lot of, hopefully, access to mana with our first strong base that we've got, so that we can cast some finishers while our opponents are tapped out. Villainous Wealth is great for this because we're exiling the top X cards of their library, and we're casting any number of spells with CMC X or less without paying their mana cost. So we don't need the mana, but we want a bunch of mana on our side to be able to pump into that X spell. Cards like Omniscience are really great too, because once we resolve them, we don't even need our mana to be able to cast spells. So if we can get Omniscience onto the battlefield and lock them out with a card like Winter or Static Orb, back to basics, these kinds of cards, we don't even need Jorn on the battlefield to get through those loopholes and untap our stuff, because we're casting spells from our hand without paying their mana costs. We don't care if we have access to mana or not. That's the strong, fun, and mean ways that I would build Jorn, God of Winter. Let's close the book. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Hit that like button if you like the video. It really does help us out. Hit that dislike button if you didn't. That helps us out as well. Let me know how you're building your Jorn deck. It seems fairly narrow. This is one of those commanders that at first glance seem like a very narrow build, but I think there are more options than a lot of people give this commander credit for, and it could be a really fun thematic snow deck to play in Commander. Other than that, I'm tapped out. I'll catch you later.